She threw hot soup in my face at a family dinner, and everyone expected me to stay quiet. But one phone call later, she never looked me in the eye again. I never imagined that a simple family dinner would become the moment that changed how I saw everything. It was supposed to be one of those forced but polite gatherings, where everyone pretends to get along for the sake of family. The table was set. The food smelled rich and comforting, and people were making small talk that felt rehearsed. I remember thinking that if I just kept my head down, smiled when necessary, and didn't say anything that could be misunderstood, the evening would pass without drama. I had done this many times before. Staying quiet had always seemed like the safest option, from the very beginning. Though, there was something off in the air. My son's mother-in-law barely acknowledged me when I arrived. Her smiles were tight, her eyes cold, and every comment she made felt like it had a hidden edge. Still, I brushed it off. I told myself I was being sensitive, that not everything needed a reaction. I focused on my plate, on the sound of cutlery clinking, on anything that could keep me calm. As the soup was served, the conversation shifted. It started innocently enough, but then came a remark about boundaries and knowing your place. I knew exactly who it was aimed at. My chest tightened, but I said nothing. Silence had been my armor for years. I had learned that speaking up often made things worse, especially with people who thrived on control. Then she looked directly at me and made a comment that crossed the line. It wasn't too loud, but it was sharp, meant to humiliate me in front of everyone. I felt my face burn, not from heat yet, but from shame and anger. I opened my mouth to respond, not to insult her, but simply to defend myself. I didn't even finish my sentence. In one sudden, shocking motion, she grabbed her bowl and flung the hot soup straight at my face. Time seemed to slow down. I felt the heat splash across my skin. The sting, the shock, the disbelief. For a second, no one moved. The room went silent, frozen by what had just happened. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I sat there, drenched, trembling, trying to understand how a grown woman could do something so violent and still sit there, as if she were justified. The pain on my face was real, but the deeper wound was emotional. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just disrespect. It was an attempt to break me, to remind me of where she thought I belonged. And as I wiped the soup from my skin, something inside me shifted. This was no longer a dinner gone wrong. This was the moment I stopped being invisible. She truly believed I would react the way I always had before. She expected me to cry quietly, to apologize even though I had done nothing wrong, or to leave in embarrassment without making a scene. That had been the pattern for years. Whenever she crossed a line with a sharp comment or a deliberate insult, I swallowed my pride and stayed silent for the sake of peace. I convinced myself that keeping the family together was more important than my own dignity. That night, she was certain the same script would play out again. As I sat there, still feeling the heat on my skin, I could sense her watching me closely. There was no remorse in her eyes, only a cold confidence, as if she had just proven her dominance. The room remained painfully quiet. Everyone else seemed unsure of what to do, glancing between us, waiting for me to react. In that silence, I realized how often my silence had protected her behavior. By saying nothing in the past, I had unknowingly taught her that she could get away with anything. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking, but my voice did not crack. I didn't yell. I didn't insult her back. Instead, I looked around the table and met the eyes of each person sitting there. Some looked ashamed, others looked afraid, but none of them stopped her when it mattered. That realization hurt almost as much as the soup itself. I understood then that this wasn't just about one woman's cruelty, but about a family that had grown comfortable watching it happen. She smirked, clearly expecting an emotional outburst or tears. That smirk was the final confirmation of what I had long suspected. She didn't see me as an equal human being. She saw me as someone beneath her, someone whose feelings didn't matter. And for the first time, instead of shrinking under that look, I felt something rise up inside me. It wasn't rage. It was clarity. I calmly picked up my napkin and wiped my face. My movements were deliberate, controlled, almost unsettling in their calmness. I could see the confusion flicker across her face. She wasn't used to this version of me. She was used to silence, to submission, to quiet suffering. This time, I refused to give her that satisfaction. Without raising my voice, I told her that what she had just done was unacceptable. The words felt heavy, powerful, and long overdue. The room shifted again, this time not in shock, but in discomfort. She rolled her eyes, dismissing me, as if my words meant nothing. But I could feel it. Something had changed. The power she thought she held was no longer absolute. As I turned and walked away from the table, I knew she still believed I would eventually back down, that I would regret standing up for myself. She had no idea that my silence was over. She had no idea that I was about to take control in a way she never expected. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt stronger than the fear that had kept me quiet for so long. I stepped outside into the cool night air, my face still tingling, my hands shaking as I tried to steady my breathing. The contrast between the chaos inside and the quiet outside felt unreal, like I had walked into a different world. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at my phone, unsure of how something so small could suddenly feel so heavy in my hand. I had never been the type to make dramatic moves or involve others in family matters. I had always handled things quietly, privately, but this wasn't something that could be brushed aside or forgotten. As I scrolled through my contacts, 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Part of me worried that making a call would only make things worse. I had been conditioned to believe that speaking up would create more problems than it solved. Another part of me, stronger now, reminded me that staying silent had brought me to this exact moment. The burning on my skin wasn't just physical. It was the result of years of swallowing disrespect and convincing myself that it was the price of keeping the peace. I pressed the call button before I could talk myself out of it. The line rang, and with each ring, my heart pounded harder. When the call connected, my voice came out calmer than I expected. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't dramatize. I simply told the truth, clearly and directly, about what had just happened. Saying the words out loud made everything feel real in a way it hadn't before. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a family argument. It was an assault, and I finally allowed myself to acknowledge it. As I spoke, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time, I wasn't carrying this alone. I wasn't protecting someone who didn't deserve protection. The person on the other end of the line listened carefully, asking questions, taking the situation seriously. That alone felt powerful. I realized how used I had become to having my experiences minimized or dismissed. When I ended the call, I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, my legs weak but my mind steady. I knew that what I had just done couldn't be undone. I also knew that things inside that house were about to change. I walked back toward the door, and before I even stepped inside, I could feel the shift. Voices had lowered. The atmosphere was tense in a different way now, filled with uncertainty instead of arrogance. Her posture had changed. The confidence she had worn so comfortably was gone, replaced by irritation and unease. She avoided my eyes, fidgeting in her seat, suddenly aware that her actions had consequences beyond that dining table. Others in the room looked at me differently too. There was no longer pity in their eyes, but something closer to respect. In that moment, I understood the true power of that call. It wasn't just about bringing someone else into the situation. It was about reclaiming my voice. The dynamic had shifted because I had finally chosen myself, and she could feel it. From that day on, she never looked me in the eye the same way again. It wasn't dramatic or loud, and there was no public apology or grand scene where everything was magically fixed. Instead, it was quieter than that, and somehow more satisfying. The woman who once stared me down with arrogance and entitlement now avoided my gaze entirely. When we were in the same room, she suddenly found reasons to look at her phone, adjust something on the table, or step away altogether. The confidence she had worn like armor was gone. I noticed it in the smallest moments, When I spoke, she no longer interrupted. When our paths crossed, her shoulders stiffened and her voice softened. She became careful with her words, measuring them in a way she never had before. It was clear she was afraid of crossing another line, not because she had grown kinder, but because she had learned that I was no longer someone she could mistreat without consequences. What surprised me most was how much I had changed. I didn't feel the need to prove anything anymore. I didn't replay the incident in my head, wishing I had said something different or acted sooner. The shame I once carried wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to her. I walked into rooms with my head held higher, not because I wanted to intimidate anyone, but because I finally respected myself enough to take up space. Others noticed the change too. Family members who once stayed silent now treated me differently. Some were warmer, more attentive, almost as if they were making up for their past inaction. Others were distant, uncomfortable with the reminder that silence has a cost. I didn't hold it against them. I understood now that people often choose comfort over courage. I had done the same for far too long. There were moments when I caught her watching me from across the room, quickly looking away when I met her eyes. In those moments, I felt no anger. I felt closure. She knew she had gone too far. She knew she could never undo what she had done. And she knew that I was no longer afraid of her. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to humiliate her the way she had tried to humiliate me. Walking away with my dignity intact was enough. The power she once held over me disappeared the moment I decided I deserved better. That lesson stayed with me long after the incident faded into memory. Some people believe strength is loud, aggressive, and cruel. I learned that real strength is quiet. It's knowing when to speak and when to walk away. It's choosing yourself even when it feels uncomfortable or risky. She may never look me in the eye again, but I can look at myself without regret. And that, more than anything, is how I know I truly won. If you believe no one deserves to be humiliated or silenced, subscribe to this channel. These stories are real, they're powerful, and they remind us that standing up for yourself can change everything.